Hello, thanks for joining us again here at Grad Ireland Live for our second session of the day. I'm delighted to be joined here by Rory Delamere. Rory is the Senior Manager of Advanced Systems Development with General Motors. And the theme of this session is A Future of Possibilities, Careers with General Motors. Rory, thank you so much for joining us here for Grad Ireland Live.
You're welcome, Rory. How are you?
Not bad, thank you very much. Rory, General Motors, GM, when people hear the name, they think big. Can you give us some scale of the some idea of the scale of the organization?
Sure, yeah. So the organization itself is 164,000 employees. It's massive. In 2019, we sold 8.5 million vehicles worldwide. Maybe not so widely known in Ireland because we don't really sell GM brands in Ireland anymore. We used to own Opel, and that's why people might know from a consumer brand perspective. From an IT perspective, GM IT has 8,000 employees worldwide. We have about 300 in Ireland. So our focus is very much on the technology side of things. GM is very much now a technology-driven company, moving more from a kind of an automotive company into the technology sphere. We see technology and software informing everything we do at this point.
Okay, and your own graduate program, which I know you're heavily involved in, that's been up and running for 2 years.
It's well, I've been involved in for 3 years. It's actually been running a little bit longer than that. So my own involvement started 3 years ago. It's been running a little bit longer, as I say. We have a year-long apprentice or graduate program that we run. What we do is it's a kind of a very well-structured training and work experience program. So we have a very well-defined training path. We typically, what we do is we take the graduates in, and for the first 6 weeks, very intensive training on all areas that they will be working on. So they'll be working in things like Java, like Python, like SQL Server, the various technologies. But also, what we like to say is we try to equip people for programming and coding in a commercial sense, right? So what's the difference between what you've learned in theory and now what extra do you have to do in practice? And we blend that very well then with real work. So if the training lasts 6 weeks, 6 weeks plus 1 day, you're on a project. You're working in Scrum teams. You're working with other people. You're contributing code to production, and that kind of sets it apart from some other grad programs.
Absolutely. And sorry, I meant to mention at the start of the session, please send out any questions that you have for Rory just through in the box on the right there, and we will factor in time at the end of the session to put them his way. And I mean, we had a chat just before the session on the type of roles there, and it's so much, as you alluded to yourself at the start of the talk, it's not automotive, it's software, it's tech. It's AI, it's Internet of Things. Can you give me some examples of some of the roles that are, that graduates could be working in or advanced working in?
Sure. Yeah, and this is the thing. I think we try to get the message out that GM is much more than, say, people's they might have a mental picture of an assembly line, of cars coming down an assembly line. And while that is a very important part of what we do, we try to paint a picture of the scale of that and what level of activities we need to do to support that. So imagine 8.5 million cars or trucks being built every year. So some of the sample projects we might work on. If you think of a truck coming down a production line, there may be maybe 200 workstations involved in that. Each of those will have connected devices. You might have a welder, you might have a robot, you might have a conveyor belt. In today's connected world, all of those are emitting data. That data is like gold at this point. So we're building a data platform that can handle up to 35 billion messages a day. And what you use that for, you can visualize that to maximize throughput. You can have predictive analytics, because if you imagine a piece of machinery on a work line goes down, and if the production line stops, you're talking about thousands of dollars per minute. Right? So we're building a big data visualization platform. We're integrating that with AI and machine learning to solve some of those problems. Other things we're doing. We're looking at kind of Internet of Things projects where you could imagine a container coming into a huge car lot or into a parts warehouse and we're trying to track its progress through the parts warehouse. It sounds like a very simple problem, but think about it at scale, right? when you're dealing with that level of scale, and so what we're trying to do is to register where everything is, to know where everything is, to watch its path through the system, and then try to maximize that. Or for example, if a truck or a car needs some level of rework, okay, it's like trying to find your car in the airport only on steroids. Where are all those cars? When can we track them down? Can we move them back in? Can we minimize the amount of time that they're outside in the yard? More other things that people might be more familiar with would be AVs and EVs, so electric vehicles and automated vehicles. So some of our teams in Limerick are very heavily involved in that side of things, the automated vehicles, where they're constructing the mapping software that the cars will use to drive. So for assisted driving, we're building maps of all the highways in the United States, for example. No small task. Okay. As well as that, then there would be some more what I'd call traditional web-based frameworks. For things like managing dealer networks, for things like tracking parts and so on and so forth. So it's a huge gamut of technology. It's a huge range of technology, but some of the really cutting edge things that people might not have been aware of or might not have associated with a company that is effectively 110 years old. Like we like to say, it's one of the best kept technology secrets in Ireland in particular. You think of a company that was founded in 1908. How come we're doing such cutting edge technology? Well, we are because we've repositioned ourselves in that marketplace.
I mean, you've over 30 years experience in the tech industry, and during your time with GM and during your time working with the graduate program, what have you learned from that, I suppose, in terms of working with graduates, working with their skill sets and embedding those skill sets within the work that you and your teams do? What are some of the things that you've learned or that you've enjoyed from working with graduates in the last few years?
Yeah, I'm long enough around to remember several iterations of the next big thing in technology, whatever that was, right? I'm a little bit less focused on what the current flavor of the month is usually, and more on the attitude and the aptitude of the graduates we work with. What constantly amazes me is the talent that we see being produced in this country and coming in from other countries working here with us. I'm blown away by that, particularly in our own model in GM, because we've hired a lot of graduates in the last 3 years, and that has done is that has exposed our grads to huge amounts of opportunity, because we've had that size of a team. So it meant that people who joined 3 years ago are now working in relatively senior positions in terms of what they're doing. So I suppose it's what I also see then is the flexibility of the grads who are joining us, that they're able to move from one technology to another. What I see is people who have a passion for technology, a passion for coding, a passion for IT, and then really they can pick up new skills. It's probably the only industry that I know where you're expected to completely reskill every 2 to 3 years. It's just a given. What you knew coming out of college, yes, you apply the same kind of thinking in terms of algorithms and structured problem solving, but it's likely you'll be working with a different language. It's likely you'll be working with a different technology set. So I see what I see is the flexibility, the attitude, the aptitude of our graduates, and it blows me away, to be honest.
And you mentioned there that it is very much the sharp end when it comes to CPD, when it comes to continuous learning, when it comes to applying that learning. The whole tech space moves so fast, and you will have graduates coming in with the basis of these skills and really eager to learn more. But you mentioned at the start about working in Scrum teams. It also must be an environment that is highly team focused. So what are some of the soft skills that are that would help graduates succeed on your team or other teams at NGM?
Yeah, very much so. It's very much a team-based activity. You may be the smartest person in the room, but it's unlikely that you're ever smarter than everybody else in the room, right? So one of the things that allows us to be successful at this scale is that we can harness the power of the team. We basically, what we try to do is to live the mission of empowering the teams. Everybody says they do it, but not very many people do. In a way, we've had to because we've had so many graduates, right? So we've said, yeah, all right, we're gonna set up. We give you the tools. We'll make sure that you understand the mission, what we'd like you to do, and then we'll give you the support. But after that, we'll kind of step back a little bit and we let you do it. We let you solve your own problems. So it is very much a team focus on working. What we've also done is established mentorship programs. We have an emerging leaders program in GM in Ireland. We have a well-defined mentorship program so that when the grads come in, they'll be able to work with a more senior developer, senior engineer, and senior network engineer, whatever in whatever role they're in, and they'll be able to learn on a one-to-one basis from them, as well as learning from their team. What working in an agile environment gives is that day-to-day collaboration and that this notion of this cross-functional, multifunctional team where everybody gets a chance to learn. And they what I've observed in particular is that somebody who joins within 6 months, the level of productivity they reach in that environment is phenomenal. It really is. They're used to, after their first or second sprint, they're used to presenting their own work, for example. I take that as a given now. So they get a grad gets exposure now to more senior people, to managers in GM. They're presenting their own work. It's amazing the level of motivation. You're into a kind of a virtuous cycle then at that point. People know that they're responsible for their own work. They get credit for their own work. They're learning from their teammates. They also have the structures in place in terms of the mentorship and the emerging leaders I spoke about earlier on. So it's kind of a blended approach.
Rory, you mentioned there presenting, and that it's something that your graduates do fairly regularly, and that's something that they are expected to do. On an application, or even as a piece of advice, how would you say to students how can they develop those sort of skills in college? Well, those like presenting skills or collaborative skills, be it with coding or software. What sort of things would stand out on a CV or on an application form, or even in an interview, as someone who's kind of tried to up their knowledge through thinking outside the structure of their course?
Yeah. So when you're presenting, you're trying to, the first thing I tell people is think of the audience, okay? You always need to think of the audience. Who are you trying to talk to? And then what is your key message? Sometimes what I notice when people start to present for the first time is perhaps the key message gets lost in the detail, right? So what is the key thing that you're trying to present? Start with that, and then elaborate onto the detail. And bear in mind the audience. So is there anything that you can do that's slightly different, that stands out, for example? But what is the key message that you want to convey? Who are you conveying it to? And then expand on that. In terms of teams, most of the college courses now have some aspect of team-based activity, team-based projects. That's a very good starting point. If you can show that you've learned from the inevitable disagreements that happen with teams. Every single college student I've spoken to, and myself included, has always had that one team member who doesn't pull their weight. That's just a given. I think that's the reason it's done. Okay, so what did you learn from that, and how can you apply that going forward? Okay,
and during the past year, how has it changed in terms? I mean, I can see you're likely working from home, I would think. How has the Irish operation in GM adapted, and how has that impacted on the graduate program and how graduates have onboarded and been able to work?
Yeah, it's been a huge change, but in a way we felt we were lucky because we had been so used to dealing with teams in the States. We already had the digital infrastructure in place. We were very well used to that. So it was very seamless that we switched over. We reused the same tool sets, but we switched over to working from home. We have been pretty much exclusively working from home from almost exactly a year ago today. Now some of us have gone into the office once or twice, but it's by and large we've all been working from home. In that intervening period, we've taken on a new cohort of graduates. I feel a little bit sorry for them because they're the first set of graduates who haven't actually physically been in the office. They didn't even go into the office to do the interviews. So all our recruiting has moved online as well. So we've had to up our efforts a little bit to keep people connected. So we're doing small things like, for example, we have a social, we reserve a half an hour on a Friday for people to have a social activity and let them choose what they want to do. So oftentimes people will just use it to play an online game, or they just have a cup of coffee and chat. We've had to, we've done peer-to-peer coaching where we've asked everybody in the team to pick a peer and have a weekly call with them. So the fact that we use Scrum makes and Agile makes people, it generally leads to a higher degree of connectivity anyway, but we've just had to be aware of the social aspect of it. More pragmatic things would be to help people ensure that they have the right setup for work at home. So people have been able to take monitors from the office, for example, and work from home to make sure that they're all set up properly. But really, this level of social and connectivity. So we make sure that we have a higher cadence of check-ins with the teams, more team meetings, more face-to-face, and even little small things like encouraging people to switch on their cameras, for example. Right, we all know that the relatively small percentage of verbal communication, right? Most communication is non-verbal. Now that took a little bit of getting used to when people turned on the cameras. The usual jokes about being in your pajamas and so on. But so far it seems successful. I think people like it. I think people recognize the need for it. Having said that, I am looking forward to meeting our grads. I haven't met any of them, right? They've been working for us for the last year's intake, the intake that started in June. I haven't physically met any of them, but I feel like I know them.
Okay, well that's important. I just want to ask you. I'm getting some questions in here, which I will touch on now in a few minutes, and they're very much specific to the program. How is the program structured in terms of your intake, application, deadlines, those sort of things, and where can people find out more information?
Okay, so I know there's a link on our exhibitor booth. We're putting the exact link there. If at the moment you go to careers@gm.com and you search for Ireland, and there's a requisition or there's a position open there for our graduate or our apprentice program.
Okay.
Typically now we take in our grads kind of summertime, June, July. Sometimes it's a little bit later because some of the courses, particularly the master's courses, might finish in September. So typically, but there are some cases where we recruit outside those timeframes. But typically, the program runs summer to summer, right? So usually our deadline's March, April timeframe, and typically we run summer to summer.
Okay. Sorry, Roy. I have some fairly specific questions here, and they may overlap on some of the things
Sure.
we talked about, but they're obviously very specific to people's own particular areas of interest and what they want to do with GM. A question here: what skills are recommended? I presume in terms of software, computer science skills, are recommended for you if you're applying for a role in GM. As in, what programming languages should you know or be familiar with, and what level of knowledge should you have of them?
So in my own team, we tend to focus on Java primarily, but we also have Python, C#, the three main languages, and in the other teams there's a mixture as well. So those three would be the main languages. Angular for UI is typically what we use. Variety of databases, machine learning, AI, computer vision. We're not constrained by languages really. It's what we look for is somebody who has a passion for technology, somebody who can exhibit problem-solving skills. Particularly for the software roles, for the coding roles. If you can demonstrate that you can code, right? We're less hung up on what language, because you can learn the language. Can you write algorithms? Can you code? Apart from that, then the softer skills that you mentioned earlier on: communication, teamwork. A level of proactiveness. So we're less focused on the kind of a narrow range of technologies and more on a broader, interest and passion for technology.
Okay, and I know people who are here today can find out more from the GM booth at Grad Ireland Live, but as part of the interview process, I assume there's whiteboard interviews, there's that whole part of the interview process. What is the structure? Is there a 2, 3, 4 stage interview process?
Typically, for the graduate positions, we have a one stage process. Typically,
Okay.
And because traditionally we have taken people from a wide variety of backgrounds. So we might take people who have done conversion courses in IT, who might have a degree in something else, for example, right. Or we have some cases where people converted from other careers. We tend not to have overly technical interviews. We get an assessment of the technical people, but there is a recognition that these are graduates. So we very much differentiate between our recruitment process for more senior roles and these roles. So it's usually a one interview with it not overly technical.
Okay. Another question, and we aren't just joined, but we aren't joined only by graduates here today, obviously, but is it purely computer science graduates that you're targeting, and are there job vacancies for people with over 10 years experience in industry in areas such as data science?
Yeah, so is it purely computer science? No. That's not the case. We have plenty of people with other degrees, as I mentioned, with kind of conversion courses. So no, the answer to that one. Are there other positions? Yes, there are. So we're constantly recruiting. So my advice would be keep an eye on the GM Careers website. We're constantly recruiting. We're all the time looking for people for both Dublin and Limerick.
Okay, and let's say to that attendee, just go over to the GM booth, and you'll be able to get the information that you need. And someone else is asking, are there non-tech roles like areas like marketing, finance, the other building blocks of companies?
Yeah, not in Ireland, to the best of my knowledge, not in Ireland. Most of that work would be in the US. Okay,
and as you mentioned, that the Irish site there's 2 sites in Ireland. Where are the graduate opportunities located, or how is that structured? Do they move between the 2 in more normal times?
Both. So is the answer. So we have a good split. Yeah, so both. Just we frequently take on a good amount of graduates in both the Limerick and the Dublin office.
Okay, and do you have an internship program or some internship program?
Yes, we're actually starting an internship program this year, right? So typically, what that is, as you know, the internship program is usually kind of third year in college, in depending on the university, and depending on the university, the length of that internship will vary. Yeah, so we're starting that this year. Yeah.
Okay, and again, people can find it more from the GM booth. And is that for people who have graduated, or would it be for people who are still in, or are being maybe second years, for example?
The internship is typically for third years. The ones the ones we've looked at this year. So typically, for example, I know for DCU or for UL, it tends to be third years. So they're second last year in college.
Okay, Roy, thanks very much for addressing those questions. I know some of them are very specific to people's interests.
No problem.
So, and I'm just wondering as well, like, in terms of when people think of graduate careers and the career path within GM, can you give us obviously we're not naming names of people, but would you provide maybe an example of how a graduate has progressed over the last few years, during your time with the company and working on the program, and how their career has evolved in a successful way? Would you have?
Yeah. So one of the things that I probably should have mentioned a little bit more is that for the first kind of 3 years is a very structured career progression. That people come in, if they come in as an apprentice, as a 12-month role, they will, we at the end of that 12 months, then there's an elongated there's another 2 years where they're in a graduate program, right? That just allows us to be very well structured in terms of promotions and all that goes with that, right? So that people the various levels are peculiar to GM, but any company will have them. But we're saying after 3 years we get you to a particular level, right? Which corresponds to a software engineer, right? So you're a fully fledged software engineer. But I think the more interesting part of that question is probably what it means in terms of what people have done in terms of responsibility and coding. Yeah, so I can think of a couple examples where people came in, joined straight from college, and now they're either leading projects. We had one person in particular who was working on a prototype for an Internet of Things for smart asset tracking. So the example I spoke about earlier, for tracking trailers, for example, or tracking cars. So we put one person, one grad from 2 years ago, on that project, working with some very senior folks in the US. We wanted to have a presence on that team as they were building up the proof of concept, and he's now playing a leading role in that because he had that exposure. So there's numerous cases I can think of where the grads have assumed technical responsibility. They've been not thrown in the deep end, but encouraged to push themselves slightly outside their comfort zone. I like to say to them, I'll ask you to do some work that you don't yet know that you can do, but I know you can do it. So there's tremendous opportunity for the grads in that field.
And you said yourself that you've been impressed by the flexibility and the skills of them. And, when you ask someone to do that, that can seem quite daunting for someone at an early stage in their career. And how have you generally felt that graduates have responded to those challenges?
Very well, by and large. Usually what we do, there's a little bit of, well, I only ask people to do it if I'm pretty certain they can. And what we will do then, and what I've done in the past, is put in place the support. So we'll say, yeah, okay, you have somebody to work with, a mentor. They'll be able to answer any of the questions that you might have. But more often than not, it's as a result of having watched their performance in maybe the preceding 3 or 6 months, watch them, and you see somebody who's obviously on top of their game, quite proactive, and say, okay, well, maybe now it's time to test you a little bit more, and give you a little bit more responsibility. People respond really well to that. They respond really well to, the recognition that's involved with that, but also then the learning that comes with that. And they love then the fact that they're contributing to something meaningful.
Okay, I mean, in the current time, obviously, with restrictions, a company like GM, it's a global organization, and that's part of the attraction for a lot of people to work in such organizations, that you're working across different countries, different cultures, different time zones. I mean, people are aware, obviously, now of the Irish operation, and people know there's an operation in the US. Where are the locations that GM are working? I mean, in the US, for example,
so it's
or elsewhere.
Yeah, it's mostly the US. Now we have plants all over the world. So we have plants in Asia as well. Korea, we have plants in Korea, we have plants in China. Most of the work we do is because it's IT focused, is with the US, and they have a number of innovation centers, so technical centers in the US. So they have them in Michigan, as you might expect, close to Detroit. They have them in Austin, Texas. Austin is like a hotbed for IT at this point in time. We have them in Arizona, and we have them in Atlanta. So it's not quite as bad in terms of overlap with West Coast. Typically, we have either 5 or 6 hours delay with the US. So most of our work would be done within those time zones with our US-based counterparts.
Okay. Roy, thanks very much. I think we've covered quite a lot there. And just, for any graduates who are here, thinking that a career in GM, maybe for them, any final words of encouragement, or, in terms of your own experience working with the company, of what they can expect in terms of culture, which is very important for today's grads?
Yeah, I mean, the culture I don't know of many other car companies that has a female CEO, for example, and until quite recently we had a female CFO as well. So there is a very distinct shift in the culture and the orientation, even in the last 3 to 4 years. We are extremely diverse. I'm really impressed with this shift in GM.